and we expect to have some good dynamic conversation today. We are going to have a couple of slides and a little bit of presentations, but really, I'm going to surprise our panelists with a set of questions. Yes, that's right, you heard surprise a little bit, because I wanted their actual gut reactions to how this topic will play out in the future. Or is it here, right? Myth or reality? We don't know yet. So, and we're going to start out initially with a couple of introductions, a couple of slides, go into questions, and we want you folks also, who are the experts too, to provide questions and comments and conversation with us, right? So we want this to be really dynamic and to have great involvement and interaction. Okay, so this topic is the dawn of the super soldier. Now, as much as I would love to take credit for this, I cannot. I have to thank Miriam Chandri for leading the efforts with a group to come up with this topic and organizing this wonderful panel that we have today, again, of experts too, throughout training, physiological, biological types of processes, various equipment, so exoskeletons, think those kinds of things, as well as selection. Okay, so we have a range of panelists here to cover the kind of breadth that might involve a super soldier. Now, when we hear super soldier, what do we usually think? Think Marvel, right? Captain America, a variety of things. Iron Man. Okay, so it could be any of these types of sci-fi ideas. But are they sci-fi? Maybe. Or are we there? How close are we there? Right? Or are they completely autonomous? Are they drones? It could be independent. Right? So we have a variety of topics. We are going to go ahead and delve right into our introductions here. And actually, we're going to do this a little differently. Again, we're forward-leaning with this topic. So rather than me just read off their bios, and I do know each of these individuals too, I think it's more fun for them to introduce themselves. So they are coming. I am Lauren Reinerman-Jones, and I have an appointmentship with the DAU, special appointment professorship with DAU, as well as I'm an analyst for Southwest Research Institute. And I have a breadth of background, 25 years plus of DoD work across the services. So that's me in a nutshell. And I'll go on to Dr. Andy McKinley.
Hi, Andy McKinley. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. I manage the Air Force's neuroscience portfolio, so a lot of the work that I manage is focused on interfacing with the brain. How do we extract more information from the brain, and how do we augment brain activity in a way that improves performance? Also, can we inject information into the brain? Can we write to the brain? Think back to the Matrix for those of you that are old enough to to remember that. But those types of technologies are actually starting to become real, and I actually have a little bit of data over here just to show real quick, just to kind of kick off the discussion. But brain-machine interfaces, enhancing, sustaining, enabling, and restoring performance is what we focus on. So these are all healthy, normal people applications, so much in line with the super soldier idea. We work a lot with DARPA, but one of the projects that we have been engaged with for the past almost 6 years now has been looking at stimulating cranial nerves to change brain activity in ways that improve performance. And so the original DARPA program was called Targeted Neuroplasticity for Training, and the whole idea there was to see if you can stimulate a cranial nerve that downstream affects key pieces of brain like locus coeruleus that enhances memory acquisition and retention. And lo and behold, it does. So this is some of the data from the lab where we were doing a simulated ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance task, where people were learning to identify targets, and people were able to learn about 20% faster. They were able to retain the information better, so about 90 days after we completed the training, the effect size actually got bigger. So now the difference is 35% between the groups because the group that didn't get stimulation, or the group that got the sham stimulation, actually forgot more information more quickly, so their memory decay rate was faster. And so what does the technology look like? Well, it's this, essentially it looks like a razor, right? An electric razor. You'd hold it up to your neck for 2 minutes, and then you have hours of after effect. In fact, we did a study for NASA, which is down there in the bottom corner. We showed we could sustain performance for about 12 to 14 hours, and that has been replicated. These learning results have been replicated outside our lab, within other labs, and in the field. So we actually got some money from OUSD from a program called Boost, and the whole purpose of Boost is to take biotechnologies and get them the last little bit over the finish line to a product that is transitionable. And so what we developed is basically in this picture here. It's actually now a commercial product called TAC-STIM. They also have a commercial product for everybody else called the Truvaga. It's a company called Electrocore. But we did do validation out in the field, so we've done, this is one of the examples. This was with the Defense Language Institute. So we took real linguist trainees and we gave them a vocabulary learning task every day over the course of a week, and we found that, again, about a 20% acceleration in terms of their learning. One of the other really cool things was with their mood. So this device, at least the medical form of the device, has actually been cleared as a treatment for PTSD because of this robust mood effect, right? So people feel more energetic, less anxious, less nervous, they feel happier, they feel more confident in their ability to do the tasks. And one of the things that we found in this study was that more people that were doing the training, the folks getting the sham stimulation, they obviously got more tired after they finished the training. The folks that got stimulation, though, actually felt more energetic. So I don't know if you've ever sat down and decided, I'm going to learn a really hard foreign language like Arabic. I'm going to sit here and do this for an hour, and at the end of that hour, you're like, now I'm more energetic. I'm ready to go about the rest of my day. But these people felt that way, and that's just insane to me. So really robust effects on mood. And then we also are looking at new ways, new sensors to extract information from the brain. So there's this program called Individualized Neural Learning System that just wrapped up, but we have a follow-on going now. But looking at some novel sensors, so a wearable magnetoencephalography system was one of the things that was under development here, and it's very, very, very close. So at any rate, this new technology will allow us to extract more information easier and have 3D localization capabilities as well, so we know where the signal is coming from in the brain with higher resolution. And then we've also been working with DARPA on this next generation non-surgical neurotechnologies program. So this is, we've actually been working with a company called Teledyne to look at technologies that are able to write to the brain at very high resolution. And so this is very early, so there's still a lot of development to do, but this is something that will be coming in the future, to be able to wear a device that non-invasively can write information directly to your brain without any surgery, without any, actually not even any sensations on your skin. So this is really exciting technology to us as well. So that is, that's basically all I have. So,
fantastic, thank you so much.
Yes.
Well,
welcome everyone, and we're excited to be here. Not all of us put together slides, so I just want to say those were incredible and exciting to see, and the angle that I take. So my background is I am the Learning Engineering Lead for SAIC. Previous to this, I was the Director of Innovation for the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative under the Office of Secretary of Defense. And so in that regard, what we're looking at across all of these learning engineering spaces is really how do we prepare for the ability to ingest all of what he just described, right? What Andy's talking about is these elements that we can either mix with the brain, or we're certainly going to be hearing about as well how we do that physically, and how those technologies are all going to connect from a data perspective, from a learning perspective, and then how we harness that to be able to move people into those operational spaces faster and more efficiently. And so the focus of the work that I've done, although I don't have studies to bring today, so I'm going to talk a little bit more generally about what it is that's changing across the spectrum, is really looking at how do we, from a policy perspective, how do we from a strategy perspective, and how do we at the tactical level look at how we set up our syllabi? How do we think about joint operations training? How do we make sure that we are connecting all of the dots so that that information about the human can be taken in ethically, it can be combined in order to make recommendations going forward. And then how is it that we ingest all of the learning science information that we know? In other words, when do we help someone out? When do we push them forward? When do we hold them back, right? A starting point is how do we get them energized? I love that, right? But on the other hand, then what do we do with that energy? How long can we push that, and where can we put that energy, and how can we use it most effectively? So all of those questions start to get answered as we think from a learning engineering space.
Wonderful. Thank you, JJ.
Hey everybody, I'm George Maytook from the Army DevCom Soldier Center in Massachusetts.
Sensitive.
That's all right. So I lead the Mastery S&T program. It's a 5-year S&T effort to measure, predict, and enhance individual and small unit performance, tactical performance. So it's very task-focused, task-oriented. I do have a couple slides, but I don't know if I have to get up to move them. Do I have to get up to move them? No? Oh. Maybe my slides are gone. All right, so I'll just talk. They're at the end? All right.
Well, we will hold your slides for how about one moment?
No problem.
And
Back up to him. Oh, you want to talk? You finished?
I think it said hold the slides until later.
well, let's see.
I can just talk, it's fine.
Okay, go for it.
I know, in the Army, we can't talk without slides usually, but that's okay. So, there's a couple different ways to think about super soldiers. Well, there's more than a couple that I put on a slide at some point. One of them is very equipment focused. It's like all the stuff we give them to make them more capable. But really what we've been focusing on in Mastery in particular is all of the human X factors, those attributes, those traits, those states. What are those things about soldiers that make them more capable outside of just their equipment? Make them more resilient, make them more lethal, make them better decision makers, physically capable, all of that stuff. And what I hadn't thought about it until we were sitting here. I don't know that we're ever going to get to that super soldier threshold because the goalposts are always moving, right? If you go ask someone from the Revolutionary War, what's super soldier to you, and they describe something, and we'd be there now, right? You can put tens of rounds on target really fast. You can carry all this weight because we're just bigger than they used to be. You can call fires in from the sky over a thing it's not like a runner. Like that's pretty super, right? So I think what we've envisioned now as a super soldier for 2040 or 2050, is probably something that's attainable, but we'll never quite get there because we'll always keep reimagining what that looks like.
That's a great point, and I love that start to discussion here in just a moment. So, thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am Erwin Hudson, and I was a late addition, so I didn't get slides either. However, just to give you a little background about myself, I come at this topic, from a lot of different perspectives. Starting out as a programmer with SAIC a long time ago, in '91, I became a CETA contractor. So I was a CETA contractor for about 10 years with the government. And then after that, I finally became a government engineer, civilian, in 2004. And since then, I came in an acquisition with PO Stride. And after 2 years of understanding I didn't like acquisition, I joined S&T, and that's where I've been ever since. Started out with RDECOM, we switched to ARL, Army Research Laboratory, and then now I'm home with DevCom, Soldier Center, and enjoying every minute of it. My research deals, mainly with decision making. I was looking at trying to create an effective assessment tool that, enhanced talent management. And one of the main things is personnel selection, and the second one was training. So I come at it from that perspective. And looking at the super soldier, I am more gonna probably play devil's advocate, because even in dealing with autonomous weapons and autonomous systems over the years, I've always not been that much of a fan because of the ethics. Coming from a coaching background also, I consider it as cheating, although we do know that all's fair in love and war, but I still want to somehow play fair, and that's why I look at it, and becoming, creating a super soldier is creating advantages, which at the end of the day, I know we're still looking out for our warfighters, so that's the perspective I'll be coming from. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves and giving us an initial startup perspective. Again, we wanted to spend a lot of time because oftentimes with these panels, right, it's very interactive, very dynamic, and then it's over, right? And so we wanted to spend a lot of time for that interaction and discussion and conversation. Being the moderator, I get the first set of questions. So I've kind of put together, again, a set of questions that will span, again, this whole group's backgrounds and expertise, and hopefully cover, and I don't mean to ignore all of you folks over there too, so you can just yell at me, okay, if you have a question. But to make sure we cover also the range of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary backgrounds that are in this room, right, and that come from all over the world, right? That's one of the great pieces that we have here at ITSEC in this community, and so I think our panel really highlights the range of that. So my first question is very generic. What makes a super soldier? So is it a person? Is it a robot? What is it that makes a super soldier? And I'll open that up for the panel to take.
Okay, I guess I'm in the middle, so I'll do this. I look at it very outcome-based. And we just had General Rainey, the Army Futures Commander, up to visit us very recently, and his perspective is, at least for the foreseeable future, it's never going to be a fully autonomous army. There will always being in quotes, I guess, but there will always be a soldier involved. One way, shape, or form is going to be a soldier involved, and that'll be more, of a teaming exercise than an individual exercise. So I try to look at it more outcome-based. What are the effects we want to have on the battlefield? What are the effects we want to have on the enemy? And then you kind of can decompose that into the different abilities a person needs, to be able to sustain themselves physically and mentally and socially in a very violent environment, coupled with all the other things that we need, from networks to weapons to food and water and everything else. So I bring it to the outcomes typically.
I guess I look at it more like from a cyborg kind of perspective, a person that's augmented by technology, their biology is augmented, their physiology is augmented in a way that allows them to perform or be more effective than somebody that without those technological aids. And I guess that's fairly broad, but I'm thinking, things that interact more directly with the physiology and biology.
Same here. Coming from a little more seasoned perspective, back when $6 Million Man, some of you guys might remember him, or Steve Austin, the bionic man, and someone being able to do more than any other human could do. Run fast, I think it was better, faster, and stronger. So now, like I said, I started moving more toward the cyborg type, being able to be more resilient, more effective, and more lethal. So that's what I see.
So I'll add on to that. I'll concur on all these points. I think it's really being able to expand the capability of the human, at least to date, right? Like, we will get into a point where we have autonomous space elements. I'm just going to use the word element because I think it covers a lot of different possibilities. But I think there's additional piece to it, which is going to be that that super fleet concept. So it's not just how do I enhance everyone, in other words, making each brain work faster, better, cheaper, or to be able to put the exoskeleton in, or to add these wearable devices, but additionally to look at how each individual human's innate traits may actually interact with that and escalate that further. So in other words, looking across people versus simply looking at each individual. And I think as we look at that super fleet and joint operation spaces, we may be able to also extend based on what each individual is, also which branch we're talking about, and be able to go even further. One of the questions that I got recently at the Pentagon was, so JJ, why do I want to have anybody be specialized? Why can't I just have everybody be the same? Because then I can move them in and out as I need to. And my response was, then you are pitting your versatility against their expertise. And what we need to be able to do is have expertise and capability to the furthest extent for each individual, but then also be able to look at that across all of our entities as well. And I think that's when we start maximizing and optimizing the system versus just the individual.
So did you get a hold of my questions beforehand? Because you just read right into this, JJ. So my second question actually has to do with this idea of individuality versus, you know, everyone, right, having these capabilities. When we think super soldier, we're typically thinking of a select few, right, or advancing those. However, if we are talking about, you know, not the entire force and fleet and everything else, every warfighter having the superpowers, who do we select? And how are they selected? What are the characteristics for selection, right? Do we want to amplify characteristics that are already existent in those individuals? Or are we trying to supplement and add and or complement, right? So I open that floor.
So my experience, you know, in the 20-some years I've been doing this, is that it's far easier to improve a function that is not already at a high level, right? So taking somebody who's already basically really close to that ceiling and trying to get them all the way to the ceiling is way harder than getting somebody that's way down here and bringing them up, right? So I think at least the types of technologies that I work with on the neuroscience side, it's you get far more bang for your buck with folks, or with bringing up delinquent functions that are not where they should be.
I don't want to be devil's advocate necessarily, but I guess coming from the sports perspective, because I mean I've been coaching and training for 30 years, and I honestly have seen it. You know, it's so much easier to take someone that's here even higher than from low to up. I mean, when you don't have the skills to start from the basics, it's a lot tougher. So it might be a little bit different with the neuroscience part, but even learning is just a lot harder from the, you know, taking it from the sports perspective in that world. That's where I come from with it.
I mean, I think I've seen a little bit more, Andy, what you were talking about, because we work with both special operators and general purpose forces, and to get that last extra percent, you know, the special operations guys are willing to spend that time and effort and money to get after it, but it's really hard to close that gap sometimes because they're already experts. You know, we always talk about, you know, as we move forward, training will be more individualized, attention will be more individualized, models, performance models will be more individualized. So I think that's probably where the focus is naturally going to be for the next, you know, 10, 15 years or so. But what JJ was talking about, you know, working as a system, you know, the old logo or the slogan when I was a kid was an army of one. I'm like, that's never been the case, right? You're never, if you're fighting as one, there's something very, very wrong. So it's really, you know, how do we optimize you to then optimize the unit? I think is where we're going to go.
In theory, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, an army of one, because you're supposed to be fighting in unison. However, like, go back to the sports analogy, I mean, you have to be specific in your positions. You have to have different types, positions, different levels. And a little bit back on his answer, Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's easier to take this lower level up a little bit because there's so much room to grow. Getting to that next one is a little bit, yeah, I think that's where you're good at, is that it's hard to get to the next level because they're already up there so far.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be both. But I think this is also an empirical question, right? I mean, there is going to be, how do you get all ships to rise, of course. And so I think to your point, yes, that's where we're going to put first procurement dollars, is how do we get everybody to operate at a level higher than they are currently? And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think also, as we're going to really enter a peer fight, it is not going to be about just having generalists. It's also going to be about having those that can elevate past that. And I think maybe that's where the question comes in, how does that selection occur? Maybe this is where we start using better data analytics. Maybe this is where we start using more of that AI to help us identify who has the propensity to go further than what we would expect, and or how do we get that technology to expand and double, or multiply is probably a better word, multiply what is capable. So in other words, our definition of expert today may be here. How do we get our definition to be up here? And when do we need to have those, and how many of those? That, I think, is going to be much more of an empirical question, and it's going to depend on the operational environment that we face, which we may not even be able to predict as well as we did in the past, which is also going to come into play. So I think this is going to be much more complex than, here's the one thing we're going to be able to do, and this is how we're going to do it. I think, just speaking from a training perspective, what I keep thinking about is how do we get in a place where we have those options to exercise. And of course, one of them is we have got to start collecting data. And we've got to be able to understand what data we're collecting and what we can do with it. And so it's super encouraging to hear the research that's happening. What I hope to see is that we start getting into policy, the approvals to be able to collect that data so that we are able to start making these decisions, informed versus necessarily our best guess.
Can I tag on to that?
Sure.
Okay, so I love everything you just said. What I want to see that we get to is more targeted training.
Yeah.
Right? Because we train everything, right? We have all this mandatory training, we have all these things, there's this long list of things we need to do, and so we peanut butter everything, right? Instead of being able to measure those key things that matter for the job that you have to do, and then spending more time on those instead of doing a little bit of time on everything. That's where I want to see us get. And just that in and of itself will help our soldiers be more capable.
Yeah. So, the question really comes from also Raja Paraserman, right? So, founder of Neuroergonomics, and he and his students completed work on doing SNPs of DNA, right? And they found a couple of super performers, right? So if you have these super performers, and this was specific to vigilance or sustained attention at the time, right? Then that are predisposed, that have this somehow genetic capability, even though they weren't necessarily academically exceptional or anything else, are those the people that we want to target? That already have this innate skill set, right? That come to the table with something versus being way down here to optimize and bring them further. Not everybody becomes a Navy SEAL, right? Not everybody goes to become special forces. So the same way that there's some selection process there, how will we select for a super soldier?
Yeah, I think with new analyses of the advent of AI as well, there's a lot more opportunities to match people with their optimal job that they would be good at, right? So, for example, on the attention thing, right? Marvin Chun has done a lot of work on functional connectivity analysis with MRI data, right? So he's been able to show that you can image somebody's brain with MRI, and based on the functional connectivity in the frontal cortex, you can predict their attentional capabilities all the way from people that have ADD all the way up to these super performers that can maintain their attention for ungodly amounts of time. And you can also start to look at things like resting state EEG. So there's been some work over the past couple of years, showing some really interesting results in terms of being able to predict how well somebody's going to do at a particular job just based on this 5-minute resting state EEG. So, are there these simple, low-cost, low-time investment kinds of data collections that you can do up front to help guide what training somebody should be focusing on, and then when they get into the training, can you use that information as feedback, right? So can you do real-time monitoring to provide the training material with the information on what the person's brain is doing, right? So based on my brain, maybe it says, all right, you need a less difficult training for your next session, and somebody else, maybe George, is hey, it looks like you've got this mastered, so you need to go to the next level here, because our performance may be the same, but maybe my brain's working way harder to get to that performance than George's.
So this will be an interesting question, I think, depending on where it goes. So we do this crudely already, like when people assess, right? They get we test them a little bit, and they get a range of things that are available to them, and it's not necessarily you're steering them because of their abilities, but to some degree you are coarsely. But imagine a future where we're able to do that and be like, listen, you're going to be an aviator. And it's like, well, I don't want to be an aviator. I want to be an infantryman. Like, no, you're going to be an aviator. Like, that could cause some issues. But what really is going to be kind of where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion, is when you say there are 50 slots and these are the 50 because of their natural innate abilities, not because necessarily of how well you have been doing. Because, it's like the American experience. We all think we can be our best and we can work harder than everybody else and get to where we want to go because this is the American way. We're going to work hard and get there. And if somebody says, no, your brain patterns say you're not going to be a good aviator, or you're not going to be as good as these guys, even though they've never flown a day in their lives, it's a very different way of doing business. It's a very different way of thinking. Would it probably make better soldiers? Maybe. But, you look at morale and maybe legality even, fairness, there's a lot of questions there.
Okay, I'm thinking more back to what exactly are we having the super soldier do? I mean, are we looking at speed, we're looking at decision making, are we looking at power, lethality? I guess it depends on all that because, I go back to the movies. I'm a movie buff, the Marvel movies, and Captain America wasn't he wasn't a big guy, he wasn't a big strong, he wasn't like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator. He was a little scrawny guy, and all of a sudden the super serum or whatever turned him into this warrior. So I guess when we go to it, it depends on what we're having these super soldiers actually do. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, on my imaginary slides that don't exist. My first slide was like the traditional super soldier. They're going to be amazingly physically capable. They're going to have wonderful decision making and be fast and resilient and whatever. But the second slide was like, okay, what if the super soldier of 2050 is sitting at a keyboard, right? They could be the most lethal soldier in history if they have access to the effects and the networks to run them, and they never have to do more than this. Like that could be the super soldier of the future. So it gets absolutely back to what are the tasks they need to perform for them to be successful, and then what do they need to be able to do.
Well, and JJ, would you like to add anything before I go to the next question? So that actually feeds right into one of my other questions, right?
Okay.
Which is, is it an implanted chip? Is it external technologies? Let's dig a little deeper. What are the technologies that are going to be required here, right? Is it, we're all in the era now of AI, right? But AI is so generic of a term, right? I mean, where there's first generation, second generation AI, a lot of it's just the pattern recognition. We're probably all using ChatGPT by now, I would hope. But there's also the third generation, like neuromorphics, right? Which gets down to the combination of this software and hardware into a tiny little chip that can be implanted, right? So will it actually just be the external technology, like they're sitting down and they have better hardware available to them, or is it a combination?
Well, there's others, right? There's some, actually in some of the joint slides on here, I don't know if you want to share some of those, but they talk about things like synthetic blood, allowing you to be underwater for much longer than currently able, and of course being able to have drops in the eyes to create night vision, the ability to you know, I fall back to training because that's my area, but so I'll say the ability to learn something much faster. One of the things in the Air Force we talk about is as we add airframes and as we get into 6th gen, where we're dealing with semi-autonomous vehicles, the amount of data an individual is going to have to take in, and the speed at which they're going to have to take up the ability to utilize a new airframe may be very, very fast. How do we get that information into the individual quickly and also recognize what they have to unlearn and relearn? How do we do all of those assessments? So some of it is really cool stuff, right? Like just the idea of synthetic blood in and of itself is mind-boggling what that might allow you to do. And some of it is just really tangible things. Okay, great, we have these capabilities. When and how do we use them? And for whom do we use them to make most sense? So I think when we start talking about, well, what does it look like? It's going to look like all of these things. You are going to have operators who are drone operators that are sitting at a keyboard. You are going to have folks that are Navy SEALs that are going to use the capabilities in night vision and blood to be able to do things. You are going to have individuals who have to be the more cognitive weapon systems, as I like to call them, who are going to need the neuro boost and expansion that Andy's talking about. And so we're going to need all of these pieces. I think part of the question is, this is largely available in pieces parts, and one of our hallmark challenges in DoD is bringing it all together. So we think there's some pragmatic challenges beyond the ooh-ah awesomeness, right? One of the things we talk about at ITSEC commonly is that modeling and simulation is so many bells and whistles, but do we use those bells and whistles to actually improve training? Not always. And so to me, this is an extension of that same concept. This is a lot of bells and whistles of exciting possibilities. What's the combination that makes most sense, and when? Absolutely.
Well, I think that gets us also to what risks are we willing to take.
Yeah, great.
Right. When we had our first panel meeting a few weeks ago, that was my Debbie Downer kind of thing. It's like okay, there are all these wonderful things we can do. Scientifically proven, in the midst of being proven, definitely concepts. And then there's well, we're trying to do simple stuff, like put a watch on the soldier. And it's like, whoa. Have you thought about this whole litany of policies? And it's like, oh my God, how are we going to get from this to implanted, chips to do X, Y, and Z? I'll differ with you for just a moment. We don't want a fair fight. We really don't. This is not an honorable thing. We want our guys to be overmatching any possible enemy, right? So why aren't we giving them pharmaceutical enhancements? Why are we making them run, all week when we could just be, giving them steroids and send them to the gym or something? There are all these other things you could do if you change societal norms and ethics, right? And laws in some cases, because other countries don't have those same boundaries, right? So what could end up happening, in my opinion, is we find ourselves in a situation where our soldiers, as talented and trained and ready as they are now facing an unfair fight because another country is willing to say, hey, guess what? You, male, are a good aviator. You, female, are a good aviator. You're going to make the best aviator babies we've ever seen. And I don't care that you're not married. You're going to make babies, and we're going to get really great aviators. Look, you're going to breed people, right? That's a thing. Are they willing to go that extra step that we are not? And until there's a real forcing function for us where we are losing, or we are falling so far behind the technological curve, I don't see us taking huge leaps.
And you know what? You read my questions too, right? What are the things that are standing in the way of a super soldier happening?
Yeah. Okay, let me go back a little bit to hit this point again. Yeah, because I thought I was the only Debbie Downer. But all right. What I look at though is you're right. It's, they do have to. We do have to look at those things. Because first thing I thought about was research. How is that going to get by an IRB? There's no way that's going to get by. So, but from the human standpoint, when you come to sports like steroids and things like that, there's side effects. There's always going to be something to deal with. As far as the breeding aviators, I understand that because that's natural. But when you start adding things to humans, the ethical part of it is what's going to happen to that human afterwards. Sure. Plus, if that human turns on you, just like we consider robots, the autonomous robots, we're afraid of those. So that's where I go. I mean, I'm a little concerned with that when we think that we can just start competing with these other ones. Why not make more lethal weapon systems that's going to stop the adversary? They're the ones over in the foreign countries that are coming trying to get us that are creating super soldiers. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, risk, right? I mean, the risk-benefit ratio is really important when you start looking at technologies that are going to make super soldiers. Doing a surgical implant for somebody that is debilitated because of an injury or disease, that's a different risk-benefit ratio than somebody that is healthy, normal, and happy otherwise, and you're trying to give them an advantage over an adversary. So in my opinion, if you're going to go into very invasive kinds of technologies like implanted chips, the benefit will have to be tremendous in order for people to want to have that done to them. And I think in the near term, non-invasive are much more appealing because it's safe, reliable, reversible, right? And I think the reversible piece is the big thing, right? I mean, people don't want permanent changes done to their body with technologies that are relatively new.
So that's actually a great lead into one of the questions I had and one of the questions that we received from the audience. So if you do these kinds of things to an individual, what do you do when their service is up? What happens? Or are they just literally then owned by the government for life?
Termination.
How does that work?
Terminate.
I mean, and how do you manage that? How do you manage when they get back into the real world? I mean, one of the greatest problems that we've faced more recently for our warfighters is PTSD, right? So what happens, psychologically and mentally?
And yet, arguably, perhaps by having these interventions, we would see fewer outcomes like that. I mean, these are some of the questions that you have to ask, right? We can't make the assumption that by enhancing the capability of the brain that there's going to be damage afterwards. Perhaps we're going to have higher energy after learning, right? Perhaps we're going to be able to insulate the natural brain in ways we haven't been able to prove before. Perhaps we're going to be able to help regulate. One of the things that I talk about a lot is that someday we will probably all have something similar to when people have an insulin pump, right, to regulate their insulin. We may have one for dopamine, right, where our dopamine and serotonin is all just constantly regulating. We're good. We're good all the time, So I make it a little bit of a joke, but we can read it. Brave New World and many other dystopias and consider these concepts, but I think we have to be careful assuming that negative is going to be the result. Perhaps this will actually enhance, and I also think we have to be careful assuming people wouldn't want to try it. I think there are many people that would be interested in body enhancements. One of the things that is interesting that is happening in our culture right now, and probably almost everyone in this room is in the generation a ways up from it, but the next generation below us is questioning everything about themselves, about society, about relationships, about the way we're talking a lot about it in recruitment and retention of military, because the straight, narrow, clear requirements that we've always had now don't entirely match what we need, and also don't match what the next generation is bringing to the table and some of the questions that they're having. We're seeing, it used to be that having a tattoo was kind of a shocking thing. Now, I never saw a mom when I was young that had a tattoo. Now it's so commonplace they don't even think anything of it, and you may not think that's a big shift, but that is a big shift in the way we change our bodies, the way we enhance our bodies, the way we have plastic surgeries, the way that we are doing lifelong learning. We wouldn't even think of that. Right now we're talking about professional certificates and whatnot. The point is, change is becoming normal, where it used to be you finished high school or you finished college or you finished military and you had a homeostasis that you hit, and then you developed across that time, but more statically. Now constant change is happening, which means that culturally we are changing to an environment where people are going to be more open to changing their bodies, changing their minds, enhancing things, willing to try things that maybe in our generation and the generation above us would not have been something that we would have entertained. So I wonder how that's going to play into it, and I don't think we could ignore it. I do think that the developmental trajectory of young people in our world, in our country, is changing.
So toward that end, we have 2 questions from the audience also. One is from Stephen Lake at Usarek, and the other is an anonymous. But they are related to this very topic of recruitment. So how would you project to recruit the super soldier in the near future? And the other one, like I said, that is related is, what's the path to becoming that super soldier? Is it citizen to super soldier, or are you already enlisted or active duty?
The DAU answer is it depends. Right? That's a. What was the first part of the question? That's what I want to get to.
How would you project to recruit the super soldier?
Yeah, I mean, it's be all you can be, right? Because what you're really talking about is, right, you're raising the top limit of what you're capable of. Right, that's how just you be all you can be. But that's really what it is, right? You're changing the perception of, this is how far you can get in life. You will be this capable. You'll be able to lift this much weight. You can score this well on your, standardized test. What you're saying is, no, we can actually unlock 25% more potential in you. I think that gets really interesting for people.
Well, and I think the other thing is that gets away, it's from the, fight as one idea too, to the next generation of individuality, and for wanting to kind of be that best self, right? So that's kind of an interesting thought.
And I think people want to be around others who are also their best, right? I mean, it's not gospel, right? Go look at the Band of Brothers movie, right? They talked about, it wasn't just some person to their left or their right, it was another paratrooper, someone that volunteered that they were going to be better than every other soldier because they were going to jump out of that plane and train really hard to do so. So if you are now surrounded by people who are the best they can possibly be, I think that's really interesting for that high-performing team thing, but also trusting that your comrades around you are going to be capable and have your back and all that fitness.
I mean, like the saying says, birds of a feather flock together. So you want to kind of rise with the group.
Yeah.
And I think there's also that you have to have the recognition when there's somebody that they're never going to be top notch at a given profession. For example, I will never be an Olympic runner. Never. I can train.
Shave the beard, you'll be
yes. Yeah. I could train every day for since the day I was born, and I would never be an Olympic runner. But I think when you start looking even at some of the cognitive things, I mean, there's some people that are just built in a way, or their brain is structured in a way that maybe they're not going to ever be, a top-notch intel officer or whatever it is, And so I think if we can get some windows into those kinds of capabilities, you can help guide them along their path to say, like, you're not going to be really good at this, but these other things over here, at least the data showing you've got a really good chance of being, top of your class or whatever.
So I think this kind of leads in a little bit to one of the other questions that we have here. So based on all of these topics, do we still need diversity or neurodiversity in a team for best results? Or again, are we looking towards this individuality?
Well, I think generally speaking, having multiple perspectives is always beneficial because otherwise groupthink is large, only by chance going to be the best option, right? You always want to have a diverse set of options to choose from and then use those perspectives to elevate the gestalt of that decision so that you have the best outcome. So I don't know that, I think you're always looking for diversity. I think the question more is, how will we be enhancing these teams? And are we enhancing them to all be versatile, or are we enhancing them to be splinter talent? And I don't know. I mean, maybe we are making you into an Olympic runner. I mean, I think it's and I joke, but so I have a son that was born with no chambers or valves in his heart. It was essentially a balloon. He has a prosthetic interior heart, and I was told that he would never be able to do sports. He is now an ultra marathoner. He runs a sub 3-hour marathon and holds the fastest known time for the Manhattan Loop. He is an enhanced human in some way, right? And we joke about the fact that, and now, to your point, he had an issue, so nobody minded doing surgery. But if we push the envelope and ask that ethical question, hey, can I take somebody and make them have an endurance heart? Would you take it? may be. And so I think that those are some of the questions that come up. I mean, his heart is functioning better than what it would have on its own, which no one predicted. So it's interesting that we have these challenges. I think we're always going to be looking for diverse talent. I think that's happy to be disagreed with, but I don't see why that would go away. I think it's just a matter of how you put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah. Now, speaking for the diverse person up here on the panel, yes, the answer is yes. Definitely, diversity is always key.
I think so.
I mean, if we're not thinking differently in our teams, even as high performing as those teams might be, we become predictable. And if we're predictable,
Right.
the enemy's going to figure out what we're going to do, and we'll be dead. So
I mean,
let's not do that.
creativity and diversity is the #1 benefit of our nation.
It is.
And that is what allows us to look at a more groupthink or single-led nation. And
say we can win.
yeah, as long as we're working together.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
I love it. So, we have 2 questions that, a lot of what we've been talking about and a lot of what we've shown on the screen also is physical enhancements and alterations, making us super soldiers. What do we think about, what mental items? We touched on this a little bit, obviously, with the PTSD question. But what about, for training metacognitive skills, those types of things? So my training
Everybody
people-
looks at Andy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are ways to, there's lots of ways to influence brain activity. It doesn't have to require directed energy or some external physical device. I think there's lots of other alternatives that people have been looking at, everything from like acupressure to meditation to cognitive training, lots of different ways to, and even using your own physiological feedback, this biofeedback to help you control pieces of brain that you wouldn't normally control with conscious thought. I think there's lots of opportunities there as well. I think typically those kinds of things don't have as large of an effect size as some of the other things that we've been seeing, but certainly there's options there.
Back in the sports world and also training world, we talk about something called muscle memory, creating muscle memory, which we've kind of found that you really don't create muscle memory, it's more brain that's still stimulated to do it, and I do that through repetition. I think repetition is the key to do a lot of that, creating that memory.
So we have so many great questions coming in here.
Before I want to hit this though. I think there's something to be said here, which is, as rightly has been pointed out, there's this ultimate goal of like being able to enhance the human and these what we consider today, to be fair, extreme measures, right? Implants and whatnot. In the current state though, we have so much data and opportunity for things that we could optimize what we have available to us. And it is because of the way that we have been doing training across the services, very mission-based, very linear, very much hasn't changed a lot since the at least 90s, if not 70s in some cases. And we are not ready to even ingest these kinds of protocols that do help with metacognition or the ability to think about what you're looking for and what you're thinking for and how to make those decisions or how to enhance decision making beyond single mission examples. And so as we think about perhaps 2 tiers of intervention, there's what's ultimate that we need to be ready for, but also what can we do today? And I think that really has to be hammered home because a lot of that can be done without pushing the ethical button too far, without requiring massive change of policy, but also is increasing substantially the impact that we have and recognizing where the other nations are running ahead. We did a study, just a review of the research in looking at real-time EEG assessment and intervention during training live. And 90% of the studies were coming out of the Asian countries, mostly China. We are not doing as much of that research as they are, and we are not employing it as much as they are, and they're showing improvements that they're publishing of at least 30% improvement. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be putting into our service level practices because we already know them, but more importantly, we know that our adversaries are using them. And so for us to ignore those which are not pushing those buttons, I think, is an ethical problem on the other side, which is why are we not helping all of our personnel to be maximally prepared for something that we know that others are using to advantage? Sorry, just want to make sure.
No, that's perfect. Anything else?
Yeah, just on that, maybe we need to start assessing what people can actually handle, because certain people might be able to handle a lot more than others. So you're right, we do need to start looking at that.
So JJ also brought up a great point, about our adversaries, and we have a few questions again from the audience related to that, right? So the first is pulling on that thread a little bit more. What or how do our adversaries, as well as our allies, define a super soldier, and how are we doing in comparison? Any thoughts?
So, I'll give you a thought. On the adversary side, a lot of it's classified,
Yeah.
right? So we can't even get into that part. But on the Army side, I actually had trouble figuring that out. Right? I was like, okay, do we have a vision, a public releasable at least vision of what the super soldier looks like, or what the soldier of 2040 looks like, or something like that? I couldn't find it. Like I had to make up that slide that disappeared. Like I just made that stuff up, right? Because like, we don't have a standard that's like, okay, this is what that person's going to look like. So yeah, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I would say, I think our soldiers are like the best trained in the world. We spend a lot of time and money on training, even though we don't always fund the TT PEG as well as it should be. But in terms of all the other enhancement stuff, like JJ was talking about, the neuro enhancement, we're not doing that. We're just not.
And maybe it's, what do you really mean by the best trained? When you say best trained, is it the hardest trained or the smartest trained? Because they do crazy things. Mm-hmm. We're a lot more ethical, so maybe that's it. We got to kind of probably decide what we mean by what's best for our soldiers.
So kind of
good segue.
That's exactly right. So, one of the questions is right, who in here, let's just see, or if you feel comfortable, who in here would be a super soldier? In your own mind, of whatever it is that a super soldier is. I see some hands going up.
Daredevils.
Yeah? So, some are probably saying yes in their head.
That was a assessment.
Yeah, but some are saying yes in their head, but they're not comfortable raising your hands. That's totally fine, but think it. So, the question really then comes down to, as is brought up here, some of these ethics, right? And the legalities of this. And then who owns this type of thing? What happens, if it hits the black market? What if anybody can do this? Because, it sounds pretty exciting to always be chill. Relaxed in the face of a storm or a fire, right?
I mean, if I'm going to shake my magic 8-ball, I say it's going to be on the commercial market before it ever comes to the DoD, right? I mean, so I think it's going to be what JJ was talking about earlier with as society changes, as things become more accepted, just people are doing it on their own. Then we're like, oh, that sounds like a really good idea for the military. And this idea of the ethical boundary, I was kind of thinking this coach was just talking. We have the luxury of the ethics that we have because we are the best army in the world for now, right? But what happens when that's no longer the case? Are we willing then to stretch some of those rules and some of those bounds and some of those norms and policies and all that other business so that we have a better chance in a peer-to-peer fight? I mean, that's a high-level question. That's a policy question. That's a legal question. That's a
cultural question.
Cultural, absolutely.
And I think it's going to change for the generations.
Yeah.
I think the next generation, and perhaps the one after that, is going to be much more open than we are. And they're growing up with technology in ways that we never did. I mean, we still value putting the electronics down, as I fight with my youngest constantly. Put it down. What I say to them, put it down and look out the window and pretend like you're interested in anything. Because we value that as a norm to be able to sit and be. And she says, Mom, that's a ridiculous notion. Then I'm bored. And her definition of not being bored is having a phone playing something, a computer playing something, a tablet doing something in the background, some craft that's teaching her, and oh, by the way, she's watching movies simultaneously and probably eating. her value system is almost different of what is considered reasonable and appropriate and how much she can take in at any one time. I think that's going to play into some of these decisions going forward. And also, I mean, I still don't tell Walgreens what my phone number is because I don't want them tracking me and buying who knows what at Walgreens. But every other kid who's under 25 is giving all their information out right and left, right? They're signed up for everything because they're very comfortable sharing information. So I think this boundary is going to shift. I don't know how far.
I'm sorry. But yeah, it goes back to, I think we talked about this a while back, JJ, UNC, and we had a conference, I think it was at the ACI conference, about multitasking and whether we can really, multitask and things like that. And we always said something's being degraded at all times. You're really not getting it all. And I remember you had a lot of thoughts on that, but that's where I get with the kids.
Depends on the task.
It depends on the task.
Yeah, if it's a monotonous task, sometimes you actually can increase arousal to allow somebody to actually maintain. So it's more complex than straightforward. And questionably, are children's brains developing differently who are being born today than anyone who was born 60 years ago?
Yes.
And if it is the case that they are developing differently, or are they able to handle things differently than what we say today? I mean, much like my son's heart, no one said that kid was going to survive to 10 years old. The shock and awe that he runs is just over the top. Well, we're going to start seeing that in everything. Medical science is changing, and the way that the children are developing is changing substantially.
And one last quick point on the ethics. If you look at sports, probably most people look at it from the legality of it, whether or not to take steroids or anything like that, because everybody wants to win. They want to get the big checks. So, it's about the fact that if you get caught, you get banned. So if it wasn't banned, and back in the day, they say that everybody was juicing. So I think it's all about ethics. I mean, the legality of it versus the ethics.
Yeah, I see the quote here on your slide. I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think that's the same dilemma we were in with developing the atomic bomb. It's like, well, if we don't do it, our enemy's going to do it. We're going to lose the war. So, I think it's more of a question of how far are we willing to go to be able to defend our values with our military.
So I think, the other ethical question here that's kind of been broached a little bit is, we're talking about it a lot of times from that 18-year-old on, right? But, again, recruitment, you will oftentimes try to start at, 16, sometimes younger.
10.
Even with STEM.
Basic that starts at 10.
Right? So even 10 years old. But what if it started even younger? We're talking about these, genotype and phenotype alterations. What if it started in a lab? What if it was a baby?
Tested.
And again, that comes down to these ethical and legal issues of, is it ethical and legal to grow that? Is it ethical and legal to enhance that at that age? And then who owns it?
Are you talking about growing soldiers?
What if you did? So that's one of the questions are coming in.
Like Star Wars.
Yeah.
I think at that point, though, you're getting past military control. What you may see is military influence. So for those of you who work in the training space, we put out from the Pentagon a book called Modernizing Learning. What's interesting behind that book, so it covers birth to 75. And you might wonder, why in the world would the Pentagon want to support a strategic plan to enhance education from birth to 75? And I'll tell you, the reason I pitched it, I said, look, here's the problem. We're getting 18-year-olds who have three major issues. We have overweight children, we have undereducated children, and we have problems with self-regulation. Now, certainly, we do not have that across the board in our country, but these are some three major issues that we're seeing at the 18 and 22-year-old age range. And I said, so what's happening then, our pool for military availability, in other words, those that are going to be eligible, is reducing. At the time that I pitched it, we were at 29%. I believe the numbers just came out. We're down to 22% of people at that age range who are eligible because predominantly those three factors. So the question came in. Can Department of Education influence the way that we do K-12 education, or actually even looking at birth to 3, because we're looking at traumas that then show up later and cause issues with the individuals as they're in the young adulthood and not able to come into service? Or does the Pentagon have to start getting involved and start supporting and understanding from that birth to 18 age range? And the answer was the Pentagon has to start putting out some information. So that is not to control or to create, but it is rather to say, we do a ton of research in education and training because we have lives at stake. And so we know a lot about how the brain and the body works and how development happens. And in order to ensure that we have the opportunity to even recruit individuals who are prepared for advanced military training, we have to start thinking about how we develop positively the whole of our society in order to be able to be functional in that 18 to 22 range. If anyone's interested in that book, it is downloadable. It is freely accessible. It was fully released. But it's an interesting take, recognizing that all of these early experiences are actually ultimately also not just affecting our adult society writ large, but specifically reducing the number of people that are eligible for service.
Well, if the technologies that we're talking about are commercially available and the younger generations are more apt to to use those and modify their bodies, I mean, it may be that you don't have to do anything different from the military's perspective. You've already got this younger culture coming up that is enhanced over some of these older
That's a
generations.
really good point.
That is.
Oh, we're just going to grow them anyways. But it does, will we own them? If there's this crazy future where we're growing soldiers, right? Would we own them? I mean,
I see
like
like sea monkeys in my head.
I mean, to some extent, we already do, right? Veterans Affairs is a thing, right? And we pay TRICARE forever, right? We are taking care of we should be taking care of our soldiers until they pass. So in that respect, that continues. And that gets back to what we were talking about earlier of like, it is not only good for the soldiers, but it's good for VA and our budget to make sure that we're not breaking our soldiers. And,
Absolutely.
right? So the enhancements shouldn't hopefully have a negative effect. But either way, we're on the hook for taking care of these folks anyways.
So I'd like to pause for just a minute because we do have about 23 minutes left. I wanted to let everybody know too in the audience, if you have any other comments that you're thinking yourself, we do have 2 microphones available also, so you can raise your hand, and of course we've been passing around the cards. And as you leave, just make sure you get your code scanned in if you didn't do that at the door at the entry. Okay, so we welcome you also to join the conversation more fluidly too. So kind of
Hello. So when you say, like, you keep talking about the youth and the youth to come, well, often life imitates art. So if you've ever read Old Man's War, you'd be familiar with the concept of using an older part of the populace to be future soldiers. So is there any applicability for using this technology to either extend our veteran soldiers that have all of those years of experience on the battlefield, or bring in older, more mature individuals that can then perform those abilities at a more youthful rate?
I actually like that idea. I mean, that's
Love it.
because they're a little bit more seasoned already, and they know what they've been through. They understand it. They're not going in naive, so that's actually better.
I think it's fantastic, and I would love to see that because that experience is invaluable, right? And as the psychologist sitting up here, and particularly, so my formal background is clinical and developmental, so I like to say I know how people grow and also when it kind of goes awry. And I have a lot of heart for our vets. And particularly one of the things that I look at is who self-selects to be in the military. The people who want to either be in the military, whether it's active duty or civilian, have a need for purpose. As I try to explain sometimes to companies, it's not profit-driven, we are mission-driven. And when you are a mission-driven human, and we teach you, train you, put you into operations, we make your life very, very purposeful, and then we bring you home and say, relax. For a very, very long time now. It doesn't feel good to relax. You weren't wired to relax. You weren't trained to relax. You weren't taught that you were useful relaxed. You were taught that you were useful when you figured out, and I don't know how the Marines do it, but duct tape something together and still get it across. Marines are my favorite because they figure everything out. And I've often said, why are we not using this population? Because it's so valuable, not only to the services, but it's actually valuable to them as well. I think you would substantially reduce depression rates, anxiety rates. I mean, a lot of that is all, the root of it is all this purposefulness and this worth, this feeling of worth. Also, I think there is a turn in the culture as well. So I'll out myself, I'm 47. I have just applied, as of Sunday, all my stuff is in, to the Navy, to reserve duty. I had to get a lot of waivers because of my age, because I'm way too old. But when they asked, why in the world would you want to do this? I said, if I've got something to add, put me in, coach. I said, I haven't done operations, I haven't done active duty, because I was busy having children. You know, I had 4 children. That kept me very busy for a very long time and used my body in ways that I couldn't serve. But I'm not in terrible shape. I don't understand why at 42 I expire, right? And so it's been an interesting experience talking with the recruiters who are asking these questions. Well, why would you want to do this at this age? I said, I think I still have a purpose. I think I have something I could bring to the table. No, I'm probably not very good at making coffee. I can almost guarantee you I'm terrible at it. However, I have the value of context, and I understand, and I'm not bothered if you make me write a brief that you take credit for it. Don't bother me in the least. I'm old enough. I don't have an ego in it, you know. But it has. It's brought up some questions of like, do we have it? The CIA, I think, just erased their age rules. The other services are starting to change the rules, and if we can use people regardless of their physical capabilities, or we can enhance their capabilities, why can't we increase longevity of service? I mean, 20 years. We know every single person coming out, enlisted or officer, is going to have another career. We already know that, and that's become part of the discussion point. Why can't we continue to use them? Why is it up and out? That's a great question.
100%. Do we have any other? I thought I saw somebody over here. That's okay. I'll continue with these for a second, then that actually builds a little bit on this, you know. So it is somewhat like a societal divide, if you will, that occurs even, you know, right now, just with the military and civilian world. You know, transitioning from that world, you know, where there is that purpose and that drive and that mission back into the normal world, if you will, is challenging, right? And it creates a separation, and also a lot of times employers are reluctant to hire those in service, which is such a shame. Now, it seems weird in our space a lot of times, but there is a large percentage that is reluctant to hire those in service because they may come with baggage, but they also come with all this leadership and experience. So at the same time, getting to the super soldier idea is, you know, there's a couple of questions here related, that if we have these enhancements, is that driving a greater divide between, you know, the military and the civilian world? Or is it bringing them closer?
Probably divide. I mean, we can find anything to divide us nowadays. I think this would divide us, right? I mean, think about it. If you were up for, let's say you're in the civilian world and there's a veteran, a super soldier veteran that is competing for the same job as you, and because of their enhancements, they are just more capable. They are able to process information faster, whatever, and they're chosen over you, and you think that was unfair. Or you're in a sports situation, you know, you're playing sports, and you know your son runs the sub, whatever, he holds the Manhattan Loop record. Are people with natural hearts looking? Maybe they don't know, but they're like, well, that's not fair. I didn't have that advantage, right? So I absolutely think it'll divide us. That's not necessarily a bad thing or reason not to do it, but I think it's just reality.
Yeah, from the soldier civilian side, yes, like once they become civilians, but as soldiers themselves, like creating a super soldier, I think that helps because, you can see it when, at a ball game or something, they, ask the veterans to stand, and it's just how, we thank everyone for their service. I think it brings us together in that regard, so hey, we got better soldiers fighting for us. So I'm actually happy about that part.
It might increase the patriotism.
Yeah, patriotism, yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So, again, related to kind of this and the idea of dividing though, then, if we think about Iron Man, right? Tony Stark is wealthy.
Yeah.
He's not, he's rich. We talk about, the first non-astronauts, if you will, to kind of go to space that aren't in the scientific or engineering world, that didn't have some other reason, but that just went. They were rich, they were wealthy. So does becoming a super soldier, lay in the hands then of only the wealthy? Or who would fund us?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, there's when we've had discussions on ethics in the past, it's access, right? If you watch the movie Limitless, he takes a pill and he becomes, he goes from being a broke loser to being this, rich, highly successful man, and it's, how do you level the playing field when you have technologies that are enhancing one person over another? So it's a great ethics question. I don't have the answers to it, but it's something
but like in that
something
movie,
we have to think about.
They started fighting over that pill too, so
Yeah.
that was a real big situation.
Yeah.
So I think the other, big part of this too is, so we talked a little bit earlier about blockers, right? And what is going to stop this from happening? What's the bureaucracy? Because that's what we live in, right, is the bureaucracy. What is that going to be? What are these regulations going to be? What's acquisition going to look like for that when it already takes forever? When we just add more committees into the mix between S&T and acquisition? What do you think that's going to look like?
Ugly. It's going to be real ugly. I mean, you talked about the institutional review board earlier. It's definitely greater than minimal risk, which is comes with all these extra rules and things to keep the soldiers safe. But when you move it out of, let's say we're successful in S&T, okay. Now you have an acquisition program, okay. Typically we field things, right? We give you are in this unit is going to be equipped with this new thing. Here it is, and here's the training, go. Everybody gets it, right? We've started doing some selective fielding a little differently, but generally, if you're in a unit that's getting the capability, you are getting the capability. But when you're talking about making, some very personal changes, and I am changing you, I'm not handing you a thing, the fielding probably looks different for that. Maybe it's volunteer. I don't know how that would, maybe it's something that's available to you, and you can self-select, well, yes, I want that enhancement. I'm going to sign that I want that enhancement, and then you are fielded that enhancement. Perhaps, that's probably the lowest barrier of entry to start. I don't think you could impose this on people and say, hey, guess what? We're going to stick this needle in your eyeball, and you're going to have night vision without batteries. Okay. But I think if people elect to do it as soldiers, they want to be better in this way or have the chance to be better in this way, that's probably the easiest, fastest way to do it. But a standard fielding is further off than that.
And as you saw when we asked them to raise their hands, only a few people did that. So.
Yep. Okay, who's going to step up for that position? Is that a question? Yes. Question over here? You got a microphone?
So with some of the older veterans that feel that they have been possibly let down or not necessarily supported as well in the healthcare aspects of what has happened in the past, if we were to create super soldiers of this content, what's the guarantee that the military will fulfill their end of the bargain to sustain their health and their bodily functions until they continue to go off? And that goes back to the cost-benefit analysis. If we get stuck in a tight situation, where do you think things would go?
That's tough.
Yeah, well, I guess if for enhancement technologies, the hope would be that not only does it enhance, but it also diminishes decline, right, over time. So, you know, maybe the veterans would be the healthiest people around as opposed to needing additional care. But yeah, I mean, in terms of guaranteeing care, I mean, I think that's a political question that, you know, would be answered above my head.
Yeah, add to that, like you said, hopefully they'll be able to get other jobs or something. I mean, they'll be enhanced, hopefully. That's part of it, but it's still no guarantee that they're going to be taken care of afterwards. Political.
I think your question is spot on. It always has to be part of the question. I think, though, from the scientist and capability level, what we can tell you is what's possible. What we can tell you is the barriers that we run into. Break.
Yeah.
Then you have care for veterans, politics, generals and admirals. You know, there is so much here, and there is so much history that suggests we could do a better job, but it would be outside of the range of this space, right? These are bifurcated, even though they probably should be combined. But should is not always the way the DoD does business because of a variety of reasons, right? Which I'm guessing, since you asked the question, you are well aware of all of these silos that we all deal with, and so I mean, I don't want to speak for the group, but it is generally the case within the scientist community for the military that we ask those kinds of questions because we do recognize, hey, this could have this impact, positive or negative. Does someone realize that we could do some improvements? Does someone realize that if we do these things, it could cause issues? Does someone realize that this thing that they've decided is a major issue actually isn't much of an issue and we're excluding people where we shouldn't? But those questions and that connection of communication does not happen as widely as we would like it to. And so I think the best that all of us can do is have these conversations, right? It's just constantly so that someone in the audience knows some piece or knows someone where that information can be shared more and more. And I guess I feel like that's the ethical part that we can contribute to.
Yeah, I mean, our job is to inform, right? S&T is going to inform senior leaders who then need to make decisions, right? So there's been several news articles recently going around about long-term exposure to our own blast from weapons, right? From firing a rocket launcher right next to your head or working artillery for a long period of time. And OSD has a brain health initiative that's been running, Warfare to Brain Health, which has been running for a while. And they made recommendations, say like, this is your safe threshold, right? Do not exceed this safe threshold. And as far as I know, and at least what the articles are reporting, nothing has changed in training, right? So somebody did their due diligence, said this is where safety is, right? Above that, you're not safe. But to fire, a Carl Gustav right next to your head is double the safety threshold. So it's like, or SOCOM, I think they said like they're trying to reduce some things, and but just because we find the answer, right? There's another step that has to happen to prevent things from happening that shouldn't be happening, and then take care of those who have that happen. I recognize that's not just PTSD; it's a brain injury, right? And deal with it.
Now, I will throw out one interesting caveat, which is that if we are doing a better job collecting data, because we have these enhancements, we might be able to inform healthcare in a better way as well. And that is certainly something. I did a tour of the U.S. and I spent a month talking to a lot of various veterans groups. And one of the things that we found was a lot of people don't realize that each veterans care for the hospitals and medical are different across the U.S. It's not, they're connected, but they actually operate quite differently. And so the ones that had a whole bunch of wearable devices that they used at home were showing substantially better outcomes. And it was really impressive to see how those units were being able to affect change. It was unfortunate that it was not necessarily being shared widely, but it was proof positive, and they had very clear benefits, both anecdotally, but as well as measurement-wise, that we can improve. And so some of the things that we're talking about would probably have a ripple effect of positive outcomes of informing healthcare de facto. Okay,
So last question from the audience for the moment. We've talked a lot on the offensive side, or more generically, it appears from the offensive side. But how would you differentiate some of the offensive versus defensive capabilities that a super soldier would have? Or would you differentiate?
I guess, defensive, I always think about, you're reducing the effects of whatever stressors are being put on the human by being in combat, right? So whether that be physical, mental, psychological, those are the defensive applications. Offensive, it can be kind of nebulous. If you're doing decision making, I think that's an offensive capability, right? Helping people make more effective and quicker decisions is definitely something that I think will be pivotal in winning wars.
Both sides.
And turn offense, or turn defense into offense.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So with the last 5 minutes, I have a question for the panelists. If you were a super soldier, what capabilities would you have and why? Give you a moment to think.
Everybody wants to fly.
So everybody wants to fly?
Yeah, see, I want to be limitless. Do it all. Run fast, fly, see things, see through walls, all the technology.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to control things with just thought.
Doctor Who?
Yeah.
I look at decision making as a superpower. The ability to take in the relevant information very quickly and make a good, quick decision and be the difference between life and death in that kind of situation. It'd be nice to be able to do all the other things too, but that is one I think that's attainable in the nearer term through some even targeted training and techniques and stuff like that.
I'm beginning to think we should test our personalities by what we've chosen.
Blue lollipop.
I'd like to be invisible, so I would love to be able to cloak, be able to go anywhere and see, digest information.
See, I picked multiplicity. Right? So you can multiply and be in multiple places at once and optimize your time.
That might mean you're too busy in real life.
But I think you're right, Jennifer. I think we need who are you in your dreams?
Where's Myers-Briggs?
I think we need our personality test.
Well, again, we're back to come full circle when someone says, how do you recruit? And my immediate thought in response to that question was atypically, not the way that we are currently, right? And I always go back to that scene in, what is the name of the movie where they were doing the first computer to be able to, anyway, they selected by crossword puzzle. They sent out a crossword puzzle across the US to see who could do it in so many minutes. And what they, of course, were trying to do was look at other specific skill sets that were not typically tested in the way that we do assessment today. So maybe we need to add a new one. What is your superpower going to be? We'll know what category you fit into.
Well, it is time, but we hope that the conversation and the discussion doesn't stop here. It is only Monday on ITSEC, so we hope that this continues into the happy hours and social and networking events that are occurring even this evening, as well as through the showroom floor. It is open, so be sure to visit all the exhibitors, and our panelists will stick around for a little bit, I hope, to answer any questions directly and welcome introductions also. So please continue this conversation, and we hope that we have a super soldier of the future.